Prior to emancipation, slaves lived in constant fear of being separated from family members and loved ones. Slaves feared the auction block. Slaves could be sold at any time. Slaves being sold was a common occurrence. Slaves would be taken away without warning or time to say goodbye to family members. Young children were taken away from their screaming mothers without warning. After the U.S. banned international slave trading in 1808, more than 1 million people were forcibly moved from the Upper South to the Lower South. From 1800 to 1860, the Second Middle Passage from the Chesapeake Bay region to the Cotton Kingdom in the Deep South made separation a constant reality. Slaves were transferred from the Upper South to the Deep South to work on cotton plantations. The transfers were facilitated by slave traders who separated family members and loved ones for profit. Franklin and Armfield was the largest and most successful domestic slave trader in the United States. The firm was started in 1828 and closed in 1836. The firm's partners, Isaac Franklin and John Armfield, became two of the wealthiest men in America. Franklin and Armfield purchased slaves in the Chesapeake Bay region at low prices and sold them in New Orleans and Natchez at drastically inflated prices. The firm sold approximately 1,000 to 1,500 slaves per year. Over the course of the firm's 9-year existence, approximately 10,000 slaves were sold. This business model worked for Franklin and Armfield and other successful slave traders because slaves could be purchased for $400 or less in the Chesapeake Bay region and sold for as much as $1,200 in the Deep South. The Chesapeake Bay region had a surplus of slaves due to declining tobacco production. Slaves, rather than tobacco, became the region's leading export. Meanwhile, in the Deep South, cotton cultivation was expanding due to global demand. Slaves were needed in huge numbers. In the Deep South, wealthy men purchased young, light-skinned, female slaves from slave traders, like Franklin and Armfield, for the explicit purpose of sexual exploitation. Franklin and Armfield purchased young, light-skinned, female slaves in Virginia and Maryland. The firm sold these female slaves as fancy girls in New Orleans. Fancy girls sold for 4 to 5 times as much as a female field laborer. The domestic slave trade had a devastating impact on slave communities. It permanently separated families and loved ones, men and women, mothers and children, and siblings. Between 1800 and 1860, about 1 million enslaved people were forcibly relocated from states like Maryland and Virginia in the Upper South to the cotton and cane plantations of the Deep South, according to Joshua D. Rothman, a historian at the University of Alabama. The historian Michael Tadman has estimated that the domestic trade split up about 1/3 of first marriages in the Upper South and separated nearly half of all children in the region from at least one parent. Tadman has estimated that approximately 1/3 of enslaved children in the Upper South states of Maryland and Virginia experienced family separation in one of 3 possible scenarios: sale away from parents, with mother away from father, or sale of mother or father away from child. The fear of separation haunted adults who knew how likely it was to happen. Young children, innocently unaware of the possibilities, learned quickly of the pain that such separations could cost. After emancipation, thousands of former slaves made persistent efforts to reunite with family members and loved ones. Slavery broke up countless families, and after it was abolished, people wanted to reunite. The Freedmen's Bureau attempted to help these former slaves locate their families and loved ones. However, a lack of financial resources and poor documentation by slave traders limited the effectiveness of the Bureau's effort. The Freedmen's Bureau also hindered reunification by moving freed slaves away from their communities to employment opportunities in the North and South. Former slaves turned to newspapers. Many placed last seen ads with the caption "Information Wanted" in black-owned newspapers across the country. The ads mentioned family members, often by name, and also by physical description, last seen locations, and at times by the name of a former slave master. In one, a daughter writes, "My mother was sold from me when I could but crawl." Post-war chaos displaced people all over the South. This experience is detailed in Help Me to Find My People, The African American Search for Family Lost in Slavery by Heather Andrea Williams, University of North Carolina Press. The ads began to appear in 1863, and by 1865 there were a flood of these ads. Over 900 ads were placed. The ads, which date from 1863 to 1902, appeared in 6 newspapers: Philadelphia's Christian Recorder, the newspaper of the AME Church, New Orleans' Black Republican, Nashville's The Colored Tennessean, Charleston's South Carolina Leader, the Free Men's Press of Galveston, Texas, and Cincinnati's The Colored Citizen. In the ads, mothers looked for their children, children looked for their mothers, fathers looked for their lost sons, sisters looked for sisters, husbands sought their wives, wives sought their husbands. Slave owners bought and sold slaves as their finances warranted. Slaves could be auctioned as part of an estate sale when the owner died. Slaves could be auctioned to pay off debts. Slaves who the owner thought were troublemakers could also be auctioned. An exhibit entitled The Weeping Time at the Smithsonian's African American Museum of History and Culture explains the circumstances that often split families apart. Night and day, you could hear men and women screaming, "Ma, Pa, sister or brother," taken without any warning, according to a witness account in the exhibit. People was always dying from a broken heart.